was born and raised in New York City in a place called Harlem. I would like to believe that some of you may have heard of that town. And in that experience, I didn't know what it would lead to, but I was in a circle of what you may call, or it has been written in history, as people who are civil rights giants. Some you didn't like, some you may like, but I like to believe that at least those historians who read may have known these names. Bobby Seale, Afeni Shakur, H. Rap Brown. These are my circle. Dr. Y.T. Walker, Dr. Adam Clayton Powell, and Dr. Martin Luther King, and John Lewis. One of the capstones of that experience as a young teenage boy, I actually had to sneak down to Washington, D.C. when the call to demonstrate for the civil unrest that people were experiencing, primarily in my arena in Harlem, a lot of unrest and poor administration and the unfairness done to, again, my race, as known as a young black boy. So the people I mentioned all gathered and created a swell where thousands of us have matriculated down to Washington, D.C. to march. And in that line is where I first met John Lewis. Naturally, he was like, I heard he was 23 years old, but I was just turning 15. And one of the things that I learned that has kept me in the face of what we might call civil rights, or at least majorly three things that he preached, he taught, say from Dr. King. If I can have a few minutes of squeezing a gallon into a pint, when Dr. King would come up north, my pastor at that time was good friends with Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. So MLK Jr. would come up with them. And I was one of the officers for the junior NAACP. And in those meetings, and meeting them, they would rehearse us in demonstrations and how to help to revolutionize and solidify what nonviolence participation, what it would bring. Naturally, as a young 14-year-old going to 15, sitting still and allowing folk to beat on you and curse at you, they had to put us through that practice to try to keep the solidarity and central focus of why we were gathering together in a nonviolent way. So that means as a youngster, they threw ketchup on us, mustard on us, cursed at us, pushed us, while we were being trained to come down south to demonstrate. Now, I will tell you, I didn't pass the test because when they started spitting on us, I couldn't take that. But nonetheless, we also came down south in that training to help break a system that was wreaking havoc on a group of people and those of a certain level socio-economical status, as they call it, impacting the lives of millions of Americans. So these experiences travel with me as the Lord circumnavigated my direction to come to Texas. And when I came down here in 1988, I actually bumping into some of the same experiences that we thought helped to eradicate racial inequality and equity. So if y'all had some more time to really sit down and talk with me, I don't mind sharing what God has done to help to break some of those chains. I'm glad to see such a plethora of people at least to come here together of all backgrounds. It gives me the understanding that a lot of it did work. I'm glad to see that we gather together to show a visible sign of solidarity that we do not like some of the rulings and the exercise of trying to wreak havoc on people. So I'm hoping that if I leave you with anything, at least three things that John Lewis really stood for. One was the understanding of what civil rights is all about. I remember when the SNCC, that's the SNCC, the Southern Student National Coordinating Committee, was first organized. There's a group of young men, which I was in that involvement of young students, that was put together to try to break these negative systems that causes a group of people to not to prosper as God has created. We say that all men are created equal. That is something that people must keep forth to make sure that those principles are still available to all people. So our trust that I gathered was about civil rights. We're not going to stand for things that hurts people, but the same token, to send a message of accountability for those that sits in offices that we voted for. So if you are not registered to vote, which is something John Lewis stood for, and many of our people were hung and killed and murdered just for that right to vote. If you're not registered, I hope a gathering like this will motivate folk. You need to vote, because your vote is your voice, and your voice is your vote. You get something like we're having right now because some people remain silent. And I heard Dr. King say that silence, there's a place in hell that sits for folk who sit in silence when the disharmony continues to be perpetuated. So I hope we're not those kind of people. Secondly, voting rights. As I said, please make sure that others are not only just registered, but that they do vote. I hope a gathering like this encourages us to continue to talk to one another, bring a level of reasoning and understanding that we all going to stand together against what's not right for the majority of people. So that civil rights was John Lewis's motivation, voting rights, and lastly, social justice. He was a champion for righteousness and justice for all, primarily to those who are historically have been under the feet of oppression by rules that continue to oppress. So I believe that when we come together, this is showing a visible sign of solidarity. But the work is going to come when we disembark and go to our separate venues. How are we continuing to reflect and make the champions of our allies who have passed on and demonstrated, how are we taking that to be part of the continued move to break the chains of injustice? So let us not let this be the ultimate goal that we gather together. It's all going to take place when we disperse from here and go to our places. What are you doing in your houses, in your homes, our schools? How are we talking about it? How are we pointing it out? How are we causing our solidarity? I call it an amoeba. The more we come together on the things that matter, the bigger it's going to become and produce a swell that's going to knock over injustice. So with that, I appreciate the time to come together. Hope there was something said that will motivate us to continue to be champions for righteousness, not passively, but strongly and powerfully. Let our voices be heard, not just in words only, but in actions, to the glory of God.